Sōgenga. This is the title that I've given to this next section, and it's simply the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese Sōgenga Hua, or Sōgenga painting. But I've used it loosely for the kind of Sōgenga paintings that are preserved mainly in Japan, many of them representing types unknown in China, and what we call Chan painting, or Zen painting, is prominent among them. I gave a seminar at UC Berkeley under this title, Sōgenga, and then I organized an exhibition of the same title, made up of paintings of the kind that were kept in our University Art Museum, along with examples borrowed from dealers in Japan. It was a small, quiet exhibition that didn't get much publicity, didn't cost much. We had a $5,000 grant from the Society for Asian Art in San Francisco, and it produced only a very modest catalog, which is not so well known. But I'm still devoted to this kind of painting, which I know well from many years of going around the dealers and collectors in Japan and seeing them brought out. And I've devoted this section of my lecture to it. So if this section is seen by any multi-millionaire who wants to build a collection of these paintings and maybe a museum for them, get in touch with me for some introductions and advice. For the rest of you, just enjoy them and try to pay more attention to them in the future. Before going on, a bit of history. What I'm showing now is a priest portrait, the finest surviving, probably, priest portrait of a priest named Yujian. I'll talk about that later. Okay, here we go. Now, Chan Buddhism, as I say, it's actually more a Chinese product than Indian, although it's supposed to have been brought from India by Bodhidharma, the first patriarch. In fact, there was nothing quite corresponding to Chan Buddhism, as I understand it, in India proper, and it grew up in China, and there are various books about that, whole literature and specialists on it, Bernard Fowler and others. At any rate, the Chan sect of Buddhism was transplanted in Japan from China from the late 12th century onward, and flourished there, with Chan or Zen temples being built around Japan, especially in the Kyoto area. And Chan monks from Japan went to China to study in the monasteries there with famous Chan masters, especially in the area of Yujian. Quite a lot of them, 112 of them in the Southern Sung period alone, and even more in the Yuan dynasty. And when they returned to Japan after their studies, they brought back paintings, including portraits of the monks, but not only those, also paintings of other kinds. Some of them founded monasteries in Japan, in which these paintings were preserved as treasures, and several Chinese monks also came to Japan, bringing paintings with them, or painting them in Japan, actually. There's some trade going on also in China. I'll speak about that further on. Not official trade, but clandestine private trade. Inventories of temples in the 14th century and beyond list large numbers of paintings in their collections. Some of these went into the shogunal collection or private collections later. So, Sōgenga, at any rate, is adopted into Japanese culture, especially the culture of the tea ceremony, but also for just hanging in the shogun's palaces, the daimyo's villas, and so on. It was almost, you might say, adopted into Japanese art. And since, in a sense, the Chinese disowned these paintings I've been talking about, they might be seen as like adopted children who have been abandoned by their birth parents. Well, that's a big matter of controversy, and one reads about it in the paper. I mean, real examples. So I don't mean to say that it really can be called Japanese painting. It's obviously still Chinese painting. But the big project of my whole career really has been to expand our concept of Chinese painting to cover far more than what was officially, so to speak, accepted and preserved in China according to the standard canon. And these are outside that, so they okay, enough of that. Now, the painting that we're looking at is a portrait of a patriarch, a high priest named Yujian. He was the teacher of Muqi, among others. The painting is dated 1238, and it's in a Kyoto temple, and I reproduced it there. He's seen sitting in a chair wearing his Chan robe as usual. These are very formal portraits, often, maybe usually, inscribed by the sitter up above, and they were brought back to Japan by the monks who studied there. Used to be a sort of myth, maybe, that the student was presented with such a portrait when he achieved enlightenment, but that turns out to be not to be true. That one was exposed by research. They were available. They could even buy them, bring them back anyway. Okay, this is the finest of them, and here is a detail of it. He holds a staff, his hands in his lap, wearing a really rich robe, and a wonderful face. Here, really close up now, the beard, a certain benevolence and I won't say enlightenment, but at any rate, intelligence in the eyes, subtle painting of the mouth. We wish we had more portraits of this kind. China is not known as a place for great portraiture, certainly, but there are quite fine portraits, and there have been several exhibitions. Anyway, this is probably the best we have from the Song Dynasty. The matter of the shading and so forth of the face, quite fine. We have quite a few imaginary portraits. That's a different matter. Imaginary portraits of emperors of the past and so on by even court artists such as Ma Lin. There are 4 of them by Ma Lin in the Possessing the Past exhibition and catalog. That's another matter. These are real portraits of real people. Okay, enough of that. Now, going on. Okay, this is a type of painting called the Chan meeting portrait, or usually 2 Chan figures in a landscape. We saw an example by Ma Yuan already when I talked about him. And this one is in the Egawa Art Museum, 2 patriarchs in a landscape. It has an inscription by a monk who died in 1250. Often these are datable by the inscription on them. There's a related painting, maybe the same artist, in the Metropolitan Museum, Li Ao meeting Xiao-Xiang, which is in the Beyond Representation, plate 77. Wenfong acquired it. Okay, that's quite fine too. At any rate, the style is pretty much familiar. The 2 monks drawn in pale ink, the landscape very simple, the tree in the foreground drawn in rather rough brushwork, and dark, and the further ones light to establish the space between them. Anyway, a fine painting. I discovered that I do have, after all, 4 slides of the Metz painting of the meeting between Xiao-Xiang and Liao, attributed to Zhiwang, and I've decided to put them in here. This is the whole, made from a reproduction, as you see. It's attributed to the early 13th century monk painter Zhiwang. It's 33 inches in length, painted in ink on paper. It depicts the meeting between the early 9th century Neo-Confucian scholar Liao and the Chan master Xiao-Xiang, in which, as always in Chan anecdotes, Xiao-Xiang gets the best of the exchange. Liao is supposed to have remarked, "Seeing you face to face is not as exciting as hearing about your great reputation," to which Xiao-Xiang replies, "Would you trust what you hear rather than what you see?" And to the question, "What is Tao?" the Chan master simply pointed up and down, meaning that the ultimate reality is in the clouds in the sky, the water in his flower vase. That they commonly did that. They didn't say anything. They would point very mysteriously. The inscription on the painting, written by a 13th century monk, reads, quote, "The moment of enlightenment comes in a flash. Why do we mistrust what we can see and value what we can hear? Do not say there is no truth between the water and the clouds." End of quote, end quote. This painting, too, is done in what I want to recognize as a Chan style, with the landscape mostly in broad, pale strokes, with a few dots of black, and the figures also simply drawn in strokes of pale ink, with only faces and one hand more distinct. The monk Xiao-Xiang has his right hand raised with 2 fingers extended, the gesture of teaching in Buddhism. Liao, wearing his Confucian scholar's hat, stands some distance away from him and bows slightly in deference. Next, please. I should add that the painting is also reproduced and discussed in Awakenings, Zen Figure Paintings in Medieval Japan, which is the catalog of a 2008 exhibition held at Japan House in New York. The essay on this painting, which includes additional information and commentary, is by my old colleague Yoshiaki Shimizu, one of the three excellent scholars, the others are Greg Levine and Yukio Lippert, involved in this exhibition and its catalog. I should have stressed earlier the great value of this catalog book as another high-level source of information on Zen painting. Okay, next, here is the, this is not exactly, well, it is in a sense a Chan meeting painting also. This one was I saw first in the collection of a collector in Kyoto named Sakamoto Fugendo. Fugendo is a very, very important Japanese dealer located, like others, in the Nihonbashi area of Tokyo, right across from the Takashimaya. And I bought paintings there, used to visit it often. And this old Sakamoto retired to Kyoto and lived in a marvelous villa right near the Shugakuen. And my friend Kohara and I visited him several times to see paintings there. And he showed us this. We borrowed it for the Sōgenga exhibition. And recently it came out and was sold in auction, Sotheby's auction, April 2009, for really a big price, huge. Ink on silk. At any rate, it's in our exhibition, Sōgenga, and it shows two figures, one riding on an ox, the other standing in front, sort of bowing down. As so often, it's a matter of a secular figure paying some kind of homage to a religious figure, and then the landscape, this very rough painted landscape, and the tree with vines on it, and the moon. Quite a wonderful painting. Very dark on silk, hard to see. Anyway, but still very fine. Now going on, I'll talk about other kinds of miscellaneous Chan-associated figure paintings. Chinese paintings, but as preserved in Japan, as I say. This is one. This is a painting of Shakyamuni, the original historical Buddha, emerging from the mountains. We saw a painting by Liang Kai of this subject with a landscape setting in which he actually is shown coming out from behind a overhanging cliff. This is a painting that I actually bought for the Freer Gallery, arranged for the Freer Gallery to buy, reproduced in Tom Lawton's book, Chinese Figure Painting. Inscription above by a monk who died in 1262. And here, and closer up, yes. Very fine face. Had no particular attributions, I remember, but it doesn't matter. A lot of these attributions are kind of mechanical anyway. Very solidly planted feet, feet solidly planted, shaded, not so free and loose as, for instance, Liang Kai. And Shakyamuni is shown as a foreigner, which he was for the Chinese. The bump on the top of the head identifies him. The earrings, he was a prince before he became a religious figure, etc. But wearing a very simple robe. The next, please. Yes, here is the close-up with the head, and so forth. All right, at any rate, this, as I say, is a painting in the Freer Gallery of Art. His emaciation is shown, his shoulder bone showing, his ribs, the neck. He's been going through great deprivation, as you remember, trying to achieve enlightenment by meditating in the wilderness, and quite unsuccessfully. And he comes out looking disappointed, and so wonderful paintings of this kind. Okay, the next. This is another of the same kind. Just a minute now. Yes, this was actually owned by the Yamamoto in Osaka, and it has a seal down at the lower right, which is a Japanese-style seal. I don't remember who the inscriber was, but another one that can be dated early because of the inscription, as I remember, and in somewhat the same style, and with a little looser in its execution. All right, here and up close. Here, the robe drawn whether in soft, lighter, paler lines, and very simply drawn feet, and again, some suggestions of emaciation and so on in the face. Okay, next. Here, here's a close-up detail of it. What to say? Well, inwardness in the eye, in the face, and the eye is certainly supposed to be. So it's Shakyamuni not projecting anything, but completely self-absorbed and a bitter disappointment at having failed to achieve enlightenment. Of course, he goes on to achieve enlightenment later under the Bodhi tree and become the historical Buddha. Okay, next, please. And here is another example of the subject of Jinza, the shrimp catcher, shrimp eater. I don't remember what the collection is here. There's one in the Freer Gallery, old collection, which is reproduced in Lawton's book, number 22, and various others. Okay, and he is holding up the shrimp and gazing at it and not laughing in this case, but at any rate. Okay, these are standard subjects of Sōgenga, which we've seen. Now, another one. Now here we have a painting with a seal of an artist named Lao Chuang, who was a pupil of Liang Kai. And as I remember, is that right? No, pupil of Muqi, I guess, sorry. Pupil of Muqi. And the seal, well, seals of this kind were put on sometimes in Japan, but on the other hand, some of them could be genuine. I'm not sure myself about this one. It was purchased on my recommendation by the University Art Museum, now Berkeley Art Museum, and is now there. Hanshan shown reading a scroll. It has been published in Japan in the Suiboku ink monochrome series, so it's been accepted by some Japanese authorities. On the other hand, it hasn't been seen much or published much in the U.S. So I don't know. Maybe it's in limbo. At any rate, I thought it was a fine painting to have in Berkeley because here next, please. Here's the head of Hanshan with this great mass of shock of wild hair, and his face largely hidden by the scroll that he's reading. Hanshan reading something, poetry maybe. Hanshan was a poet, as you know. The hand, the eyes quite sharp. Okay, here's the middle part with the ties of the robe, and here the lower part with his feet again very firmly planted on the ground. Well, it seemed to me this was a fine image for Berkeley because Berkeley has there was a lot of Zen going on in the great Berkeley literary renaissance of the late 40s, but also the student movement of the 60s, early 70s. Berkeley has been associated with Zen from way back, and I thought this was a great Berkeley character, a kind of Telegraph Avenue looking character with bare feet and sloppy robe and shock hair and so on. Well, it hasn't been used that way as much as I hoped it would be, but still, I think it's a fine painting, and here it is. Okay, attributed to Lao Chuang, accept it or not. Now, I showed before, and bring back now, the paintings that are attributed in Japan were attributed to a 10th century artist named Shi. Here's one of them. These were titled, you remember, Two Patriarchs to Their Minds in Harmony. And I showed them back when we were considering 10th century paintings, saying that they belonged, in fact, to the late Song, as indeed they do. The inscriptions on to the left of this one are interpolated, faked, and what they were originally, I don't know whether they're parts of a hand scroll or two separate paintings or just what. At any rate, this one seems to be the monk who was always shown with the tiger, as you remember. Not really a patriarch of Chan exactly, but one of these Chan characters. Here he is up close, quite a wild, rough brushwork. And now that we've seen it and are familiar with it, we can recognize this as belonging, in fact, to this Japanese collection type of Sōgenga. In other words, Chinese Sōgenga paintings as collected in Japan. Well, not going to say any more about it. The drawing of the robe here is rather rougher than usual, obviously done with a rough brush. Sometimes they used a brush made of straw just to make it even more wild. They would do this for calligraphy too. I mean, so the brush would break and leave streaks like this. And the other one here, which may be the second patriarch, the one who learned from Bodhidharma, harmonizing his mind. This is the opinion, as I said, of Jan Fontaine in these Zen painting and calligraphy catalog where they were shown. Okay, and he may be drunk and drinking and sleeping it off and harmonizing his mind, so to speak. Fake imperial seals on the right. Okay. Yeah, okay, nothing much to say about it. The problem, if it is the second patriarch, he shouldn't have his hand there because he cuts his hand off. You can see it down under the robe at the right. I don't know anyway. I leave this open for research. Now, going on to talk about Zenga. I'll speak first about the type of pictures of Guanyin, or Kannon in Japanese, in the form in which Kannon is white-robed. And I bring back, just to show you and remind you, the painting from the late 12th century that shows arhats looking at a scroll painting of Guanyin with the detail. I showed this earlier when we were looking at paintings attributed to Muqi. The great example is, of course, the centerpiece in Muqi's triptych in the Daitokuji. And talking about it then, it's supposed to have been a type invented by Li Gonglin, so goes the story at least. There are many, many, many paintings of Guanyin. Let me show first, although it's actually in the following period, the Yuan period, an example of a standing Guanyin. Let me, while I have this on the screen, this in its detail, this is a Guanyin painting from the Yuan dynasty that was in my Sōgenga exhibition, and the inscription on the top is by a famous Yuan dynasty monk in China named Ming Bo. We see a lot of his handwriting. His calligraphy is quite fine, and he writes colophons on paintings, and he writes inscriptions on paintings, and I'll show a couple portraits of him later. While I have these on, let me just talk about this kind of painting generally. Most of the things I'm going to show are owned by dealers. And the exhibition that I organized, Sōgenga, was mainly drawn, except for the ones of our own paintings, drawn from Japanese dealers who lent their paintings with the hope that they might be sold in the U.S. Yamamoto Kozo, or at that time his father, Yamamoto Sogoro, marvelous dealer down near Osaka, Amagasaki, Setsu Gatodo in Tokyo I talked about before, and others. I should say that paintings of this kind could be found in Japan in the 70s, 80s when I was buying, in considerable numbers and for low prices. Most collectors of Chinese paintings didn't want them. It was outside the area of what they wanted. They were pursuing other things. The Sōgenga exhibition that was held in our museum in 1982, which followed a graduate seminar I gave on that subject, was put together. We had a $5,000 grant from the Society for Asian Art in San Francisco. If you organize an exhibition today, you know what $5,000 is. It's nothing. And about half the exhibition, 20 paintings or so, were from my own my family collection, bought cheap in Japan, and 2 of them were things that the museum itself had bought for low prices on my recommendation. And the rest of them were borrowed from dealers, with some hope, as I say, of sale, mainly to the Asian Art Museum across the bay in San Francisco. But although the curators of that time came, that was Clarence Shangraw and Stephen Little then, and chose paintings they wanted and were hoping to get them for the collection there, and money had already been allotted for them by the Society for Asian Art, the then director of the Asian Art Museum, that's Yvon D'Argenset, came over and saw the exhibition and went back and nixed them all, said that not one of them in the whole exhibition was good enough for their collection. It either wasn't genuine or it wasn't good enough condition or not good enough in quality or whatever. And yeah, well, there we are. Anything involving me, he automatically opposed. That's a sad story. You can find it on my website in Reminiscence number 55 if you want to look. Several of the paintings in it, including the one belonging to Yamamoto, as I say, went on to become worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they could have stayed in San Francisco. There we are. Okay, here back to this one. This is a white robe Guanyin which is actually by a little-known artist from the Yuan dynasty named Jueji Yongzhong. It doesn't matter. Forget the name. We also have a seated guanyin by him, which here, put this, change it, and put on the seated guanyin. This was, I think, is in the Cleveland Museum. Sherman Lee bought one of the paintings of his. He probably did these by the hundreds. It's a very simple kind of guanyin and simply drawn in line, continuous line. And Zen artists in temples often, I believe, I don't know what the documentation is, did these paintings in numbers to give to people in return for gifts to the temple or whatever, donations. And they're by nature simple paintings. Paintings of grapes by Rurguan and paintings of other subjects by other Zen artists. At any rate, this is probably such a painting. The next, please. Actually, my article, which I've mentioned before, on continuations of Chan painting into the Ming Qing period, reproduces this one, which is a painting by a 17th century woman painter. This is in the Palace Museum in Beijing, of all places. And it's as though she had learned from this almost anonymous Yuan monk, which is not the case, of course. I was making the point on how certain forms are passed over the centuries, and people don't even care who originated them. It's very, very similar, and she probably did them again in large numbers, and this one happens to survive. A few other guanyin paintings. This one, it's cut off, unfortunately, at the top. Something, I misphotographed it. But a white robe guanyin of another kind, drawn in more fine style, on silk. This is owned by Yamamoto, and as I remember, and was in our exhibition. Guanyin seated on a lotus throne. Another similar white robe guanyin. This image copied from an exhibition catalog, where it's dated in the Yuan dynasty. Guanyin here sits on a woven mat and appears to be holding something, perhaps a cup with a lotus. The coloring on the face has suffered some kind of decomposition. And here is one more white robe guanyin in a circular frame, with an impressive-looking inscription and seals at the top. And what can I tell you about it? Attribution, writer of the inscription, date, collection? Answer, none of the above. Absolutely nothing. These images are made from 4 old slides which have no writing on them at all. I put the painting in anyway, just for its quality, and to show how popular and pervasive this kind of image of guanyin is. All right, at any rate, another fine painting of guanyin. This one, let's have the details, please. Closer up. This is actually guanyin shown as a princess, or as a princely figure. Not princess because bodhisattvas are sexless. Floating on a leaf on the water. And quite beautiful robes done in a very traditional, old-fashioned style, as though it were a Six Dynasties painting or something with all these parallel line drawings. And jewelry. The little figure of Amitabha Buddha in a crown on her head. The next, please, close up. Okay, this is a very different version of guanyin, closer to some of the guanyin paintings that you'd find at Dunhuang and elsewhere in more traditional Buddhist painting. This is also in our exhibition, and one that should have been purchased for San Francisco. Anyway, fine painting. And here, this also was in our exhibition. Unfortunately, the side of the hole is very dark and hard to see, but the detail is not bad. This is a guanyin shown in a tattered robe. I don't know anything about the iconography of this, but it was a quite affecting painting, looking sad, looking poor, impoverished, that is, and with this tattered robe. This is in our exhibition, rather badly damaged, as you see. This is Yamamoto. Okay, enough of that. Now, one of the major subjects in this kind of painting is Bodhidharma. He was, as I say, the semi-mythical Indian monk who brought the Chan doctrine from India to China in the 6th century. And he's always usually shown as hairy, hirsute, bearded, and big eyebrows, sometimes hair on the chest as here. This is part of the foreigner's image, dark complected often. He tried to offer the doctrine of Chan Buddhism to the emperor of that time, Liang Wudi, but Liang Wudi didn't accept it, or they didn't really communicate very well, and after an encounter that came to nothing, Bodhidharma crossed the Yangtze River again, going back to the other side on a reed. You sometimes see him riding on this reed on the water. And there on the other side, he entered a cave and meditated until finally the second patriarch, named Huike, managed to persuade him of his sincerity by cutting off his hand and offering it to him. A rather awful story. But that's the story of the transmission of Chan Buddhism in China. Okay, this one, the one with the blue mounting on it, is an old painting in the Freer Gallery. Actually, Freer bought some fine paintings of this kind, along with other kinds that were more or less rejected in China and sold cheap to foreigners. This one is, I think, in the Lawton catalog. I don't remember. And here's the head of it, showing Bodhidharma, as I say, as a bearded, solemn, or sometimes fierce-looking character. He had this reputation too of being rather an angry man, we might say, bald, and anyway, heavy. Here's a red-robed Bodhidharma. I don't know what collection this is, with an inscription at the top. One of the dealers, again, showing very much the same. Well, there are quite a lot of these. He was the original patriarch, first patriarch of Zen Buddhism or Chan Buddhism, so it was natural that he would be represented often. Here's a red-robed Bodhidharma. This one is from actually a Chinese painting brought to Japan from Ningbo, a port city where paintings of this kind were produced in numbers for sale. The inscription is dated 1198, as my notes say. Well, I'll talk later about the exhibition and catalog of Chinese paintings in Japan that came from Ningbo. And this is in it, plate 128. So I'll talk about that later. Chinese painting brought to Japan as trade goods. Next, this is, I don't know what this is. I looked and it's an old slide. I actually went through several drawers of slides of this kind of painting and chose out some to show and talk about, and this was among them, but I can't remember where it was. It's a wonderful head of Bodhidharma from a painting which I don't have a slide of the rest, and I don't know where it was. Anyway, great sense of humanity. These were, boy, they had real feeling for their subjects. These are paintings with real human feeling in them. And if you know, well, I won't say, but it's something that's avoided in a lot of Chinese painting, more orthodox and accepted Chinese painting, because they didn't want it. They didn't want it. They didn't want to be affected that way by paintings. The open mouth, the really quite moving expression in the eyes and the heavy eyebrows. Anyway, okay, enough of that. Let's go on. This is a bad slide with a pretty good detail, fortunately, of a hooded Bodhidharma crossing the Yangtze River on a reed. This is the Princeton Art Museum, one of the paintings that Wunfeng bought for them. Quite fine. I don't remember what these writing down at the lower left is. Probably a signature of someone. Li Yaofu, I'm not sure. At any rate, okay, it must be in one of the catalogs, Wunfeng's catalogs of the Princeton collection. At any rate, it represents the story of how Bodhidharma, after being rejected by Wudi, the emperor of the Liang, crossed the Yangtze River on the reed. And the next, please. And this is a detail from a painting in the Cleveland Art Museum. In the 8 Dynasties catalog, it's number 64. This is only a detail of the central part of it. It's actually a hanging scroll in the landscape. And it shows the scene in which Bodhidharma is meditating, and then the second patriarch, Huike, approaches him, having cut off his arm and offering it to Bodhidharma and so forth. Okay, this is a painting Sherman Lee bought for Cleveland. All right, now next, please. Here is a portrait, one of quite a few portraits, I don't know quite a few, but a number, in Japan of this famous Yuan dynasty monk Ming Bo. It's outside our subject properly because I'm supposed to be cutting this off with end of song, but for this kind of subject it scarcely matters. The dating is often uncertain anyway. And it's inscribed at the top by Ming Bo himself. He probably did inscribe numbers of portraits of himself, either to give or for sale or whatever, give to monks who are returning to Japan or for monks in China. We don't know much about this kind of painting as it was preserved in Chinese temples. It very probably was, but it's not well recorded, and we don't have the paintings and so on. So I can only really talk about it in these examples from Japan. Here's the head of Ming Bo. He was a rather portly figure, and his face is distinctive, his hair heavy, his mouth, and so forth. Here is another portrait of Zhongfang Ming Bo, also inscribed by him. This one is finer in quality and depicts him smiling, where the other one shows him with a slight frown. Several portraits of Ming Bo are listed on page 366 of my old index, and I note there where they are reproduced. This one, the finest of the ones I know, is in a temple called the Kogenji in Hyogo Prefecture, and it's reproduced as plate 65 in my Hills Beyond a River book. You'll find more information on it accompanying the text there. Like the other one, it bears a long inscription by Ming Bo himself. He must have had numbers of these portraits made and inscribed them, probably for sale to visiting monks and others. It bears a signature of an otherwise unknown artist named Eon, and it's also listed under his name on page 285 of my index. Next. Ming Bo is depicted again in a simple monk's robe, seated in a formal posture, his hands folded, his feet folded under him, his shoes on the stool in front of him. Next. The otherwise unknown portraitist, Eon, probably a priest who made a specialty of painting these, doesn't try to hide Ming Bo's corpulence, but shows it off with wrinkle lines at the top of his protruding belly. The painting is cracked from many horizontal rollings, done after it had dried out enough to lose its flexibility. A simple remounting of the kind that the monters call urauchi, rebacking, would flatten it out again, and they would retouch to remove the crack marks in front. Next. The face closer up, showing his slight smile, the outer edges of the eyes pulled downward in what is meant as a benevolent expression. His hair is neat but untrimmed. Next. Even his shoes, placed neatly on the stool in front of him, are carefully depicted so that one can see the lining inside and have a sense of their volume. As I believe I said earlier, we used to believe that these portraits were presented to disciples when they attained enlightenment, satori, and left the monastery, but that was later proven to be a myth. They were freely available to anyone who wanted to buy them. Next, please. Here's another one. This one simply ink and light colors on paper. This is in another of these dealers at Nihonbashi in Tokyo. There's a number of these in Japan. He was a famous priest. Now, here is a map just to show you what I was speaking of. Ningbo is a port city down here, and on the map you can see where that square is. At the top of the square is Shanghai, a dot on the coast of the sea, and then straight down below it, also on the coast, is Ningbo. Inland is Hangzhou. In other words, it was a port city for the area of Hangzhou. And trade went on with Japan and Korea and other places. You see Korea here labeled Gaoli, their name then. And then up in Japan, on the coast in the southern southwest part, is the city of Hakata, which is a port city where trade went on. As I say, this was a clandestine trade, not official, and a lot of Chinese Buddhist paintings were purchased from Ningbo, from artists in Ningbo, and brought back to Japan, hundreds. And they're in collections all over Japan in temples, the 500 Arhat series, and paintings of kings of hell or various Buddhist subjects. And actually a delegation of Japanese young scholars, I remember, well, maybe not so young, at any rate, going to Ningbo as soon as they were able back in the days when it wasn't easy to go to China. And they went to Ningbo and went around finding the places where these paintings had been done, because the artists would sometimes inscribe not only their names, but also their addresses, sort of west of the something bridge, so people could come back and buy more paintings. Okay, and they were able to find them, and it was really pretty exciting for these Japanese. That's another matter. There's a catalog, at any rate, titled Sacred Ningbo, Gateway to 1300 Years of Japanese Buddhism, Nara National Museum 209. And in that catalog, there's this map and the paintings, the painting of the red-robed Bodhidharma that I showed, and also the next two, please. Two priest portraits facing each other. These are numbers 136 and 137 in that catalog, portraits of two patriarchs named Do-sen Rishi and Genjo Rishi. I don't know what the Chinese would be, but anyway, they're patriarchs of the particular sect of the temple who ordered these. The date on them is 1220, and they're in a temple in Kyoto named the Senjuji. I'm not sure what sect is which Chan, this is. One of the patriarchs is 6th, 7th century, and the other is 11th, 12th century. Okay, and they are like the famous painting of Wuzhong, only not quite so carefully and done as that, not so rounded and three-dimensional and moving, but fine paintings anyway. Always the priest is shown in this very formal position, sitting in a chair. In this case, he seems to be a scepter of some kind, yes, and a scroll seems to be. The other one holding what? Scepter. Their shoes are down below, their feet are drawn up under them. They're sitting in that manner. Okay, and here, next please, here is a portrait of a 13th century Japanese priest who was the founder of that temple. And this painting was done in Japan in 1227 on his deathbed to form a triptych with the above two. So his portrait goes in with the two of the patriarchs of the sect, and they're kept in the same temple. He himself had studied in China and came back. Well, I use this to make a point, which is that sometimes we can't easily tell Japanese paintings of this type from Chinese. And I don't want to say it doesn't matter. Obviously it does matter. But think about what happens, for instance, if a Japanese priest goes to China and learns to paint there, and then comes back, or maybe best paintings in China. Are they Japanese paintings because he was Japanese by birth? Or he comes back to Japan. Or a Chinese priest comes to Japan and paints there. Well, they are almost adopted into being part of Japanese painting. I'm not really raising this as an issue, as I think I said before. They're in a sense they're properly Chinese paintings and Japanese paintings, but it's sometimes hard to tell. Is all I mean to say, I guess, and it may not be all that terribly important. Okay, going on. Among the late Song artists whose names are known from their signatures on paintings imported from Ningbo to Japan is a certain Lu Shenzhong. He is, of course, unrecorded in Chinese books. No Chinese compiler of a dictionary of artists would think of including these commercial painters in Ningbo, who were engaged in mass-producing sets of paintings for sale to Japanese temples, and probably to Chinese Buddhist temples as well, though I don't know any evidence of that. These are two from a series of 10 Kings of Hell, now kept in the Nara National Museum. Originally kept in some Buddhist temple, they were displayed there to frighten the faithful into following the true path by showing them the awful consequences if they didn't. These two are reproduced in the Sacred Ningbo Catalog, plate 80 at the bottom, along with the rest of the series. I don't have much to say about them. Lothar Lederosa has written about Kings of Hell paintings, among others. I remember making detailed slides of the paintings on the screens behind the kings, paintings in ink on silk, ink monochrome. as reliable examples of late Song landscape painting and ignoring the rest. That, I'm afraid, indicates my level of interest in Buddhist painting. The next, please. Here's another by Lin Chuzhong, for also in this in the Nara National Museum. This one is what the Japanese call a Neihanzu, picture of the death of the Buddha, or more properly, the entry of the Buddha into nirvana, because the Buddha didn't really die. There are many of these, going all the way back to Dunhuang, and the Buddha is always shown recumbent, lying on his side, facing us, as if asleep, and his disciples, the original arhats or lohans in Chinese, are gathered around him, mourning his death, weeping. Sometimes here there are only 10 of them, sometimes there are great numbers. And various divine beings have gathered typically to be at the event, not so many here. But anyway, up in the sky, you see on a cloud, you see his mother coming. She, as I remember the story, she arrived late, and after we had already entered into nirvana. And the Buddha, to oblige her, awakened from nirvana and greeted her and preached a sermon before he sank back into nirvana. Good story. This is plate 67 in the Sacred Ming Bo catalog. As I say, it's also in the Nara National Museum. Next, please. A very popular subject in Chan or Zen painting are the two bums, Dharma bums, wastrels, wanderers, Hanshan and Shurda. Hanshan is, of course, a poet to whom famous poems are attached. Translated, Gary Snyder and others have done the poems of Hanshan. Shurda wandered around with him. They both lived in a temple. Shurda, as I remember, was a sort of a temple servant, goes around with a broom. He swept things up. So Hanshan often is pointing at the moon. Shurda is often shown with his broom. And here are the two of them with inscriptions at the top. I don't remember who has this one, but the one of Hanshan pointing exists here. Next, please, in a much better version, older presumably, dark slide. This is a painting owned by Yamamoto, an old attribution to Liang Kai, but at any rate, just an anonymous, maybe 13th century painting. Quite fine. He's pointing up at the moon, and the face here is much more serious, and the whole thing is quite fine. In ink on silk, rather dark. Yamamoto had, and the young Yamamoto Kozo still has, a large number of paintings of this kind. So if you're organizing an exhibition or if you want to study them, then get in touch with him and go there. I think he's turning this family collection into a kind of a study collection in some way. All right, anyway, enough of that. This is a funny painting of Hanshan and Shurda. Hanshan is pointing up at the moon, and anyway, they're seen in a landscape in this case. Hanshan is sort of laughing wildly. Fairly small painting. This is actually attributed to Liang Kai, but of course it isn't Liang Kai. This is in the Masaki Museum near Osaka, sort of the outskirts of Osaka. And I remember going there with several other scholars, an arrangement by Shimada, and we were met by the old Mr. Masaki. It was a summer day, and he was wearing his underwear. So we were met by the director of the museum in his underwear, and we didn't undress to our underwear, but we made ourselves comfortable and drank with him and looked at paintings, had a wonderful time. Japanese gentlemen used to strip down to their underwear when they rode on the train sometimes, buy a bottle of whiskey at the train station, drink the whiskey, lie back, have a comfortable journey. All right, anyway, that was those days. Anyway, here's the painting from the Masaki collection, quite a fine collection of paintings of the two Hanshan Shurda, old attributions, I say, to Liang Kai. Forget that. Okay, next, please. Here is this is quite fine painting of Shurda with a broom. This is attributed, as I remember, to an artist named Ru An. Not much is known about him, and I don't want to raise this question. There are a few cases of artists who were known only in Japan and we don't have any idea who they were, but the names are attached to things. This is anyway a wind-blown Shurda with his broom, and here, let's see, do I have a good detail of that? Yes, better detail. Oh, this is a fine painting. Really wind-blown, laughing or smiling, pointing something or holding something, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, a lively, enjoyable painting. These are so free of all the constraints that other kinds of Chinese painting generally have to operate under. Okay, next please. This is actually a Yuan dynasty painting of the sixth patriarch arriving at the monastery with a hoe. He was, I think, he arrived as a kind of laborer. And the fifth patriarch I showed in a picture with pine seedlings over his hanging from his hoe. But this, I think, is the sixth patriarch. At any rate, this is also in the Masaki Museum in Osaka. Next, please. Here is a painting of Hote, Butai. I've shown several. A marvelous one is attributed to Muqi before. This fat monk who was a kind of pre-existing avatar of Avaloki, of Maitreya, the Buddha of the future, and going around with his big bag. This was owned by Mizutani Nisaburo, one of the Mizutani brothers, who are dealers, very important dealers in Kyoto. One of them may be still alive and operating. Okay, nothing much to say about it. Here it is. Next, please. A boy on a water buffalo. This is I think Yuan dynasty. I don't know what the collection was, but I put it on just to. Now we move into a category of paintings that are loosely Chan. I talked at great length about the persimmons and the question of what we mean by Chan or Zen painting when it doesn't represent a Chan or Zen subject. Now, obviously, boys in water buffalo, I talked about them in a very different connection, in connection with academy painting and their political implications. But in Chan, they have very different meanings, and I spoke again in reference to one of them about the 10 ox-herding pictures. At any rate, there are pictures of buffalo and water buffalo and herd boys. This one is a staff and is pointing up at a bird flying. Looks like a swallow with a split tail. I don't know what the implication of that is. And the animal, as it plods along, is raising its snout and sort of mooing, apparently. Okay, charming painting. I have no idea where it is or was. Here's a painting that was owned by, I think it's the dealer Kumita in Kyoto. Quite a fine painting. Now we're getting into a category of late Sung painting in very dissolved landscapes, highly simplified landscapes, obviously related to some works associated with Xiaogui and with Muqi eventually. Anyway, this one is anonymous and shows the boy seated on the bank and the buffalo sort of wallowing in the water, in the river. Quite fine, with very, very simple representation of a willow tree and just the simplest indication of the further bank. I don't have a detail of this, at least I couldn't find it. But this, I say, was owned, I think, by the dealer Kumita. Well, it belongs to a category of subjects that, as I say, are kind of loosely associated with Chan, but not for clear reasons. Next, please. Here is a very fine painting, put on the original and the detail, too, if you will, the horizontal detail of the lower part. This one I remember very well. I saw it somewhere in Japan and recommended it to a dealer in New York, Nat Hammer, who was a friend, and I saw a lot of him. He handled a lot of interesting paintings. And he acquired this one and eventually sold it to the Kimball Art Museum, this extremely rich museum in Texas. And it's now in the Kimball Museum. I hope they appreciate it. It had an old attribution to Xiaogui, which doesn't mean anything. But it's a very fine 13th century painting, identifiable, I believe, as 13th century by the inscription at the top, although I don't remember the details entirely. What it represents, as you see, is a moonlit landscape, the moon in the sort of middle right here, just beyond the cliff or the land, the rise of land, and then down below a traveler on a donkey with his servant behind him, the usual thing, making their way along the path. Spacious, mysterious, cool, very evocative, lovely paintings. And this one, as I say, went properly, I think, into the Kimball Art Museum. Really fine. And this belongs somehow in this category that I'm not exactly trying to define, trying to avoid defining really, of Sōgenga in Japan. Now the next. Here, I showed this picture when I spoke about Muqi at the very end and said I'd bring it back. Well, there's a big category of paintings associated loosely with Muqi, but, and again, in some sense, Zen painting without, in ways that we can't easily define, showing birds and trees or birds and bamboo. And I'll show several of those, again, without trying to attribute any of them or even to date them. Presumably 13th century, maybe one or another of them goes into the Yuan dynasty. Anyway, sort of mysterious and evocative paintings of a kind which, if you hang in your tokonoma and gaze at for a while, you are kind of drawn out of your present preoccupations and worries, whatever they are, into another quieter world in which the birds flit around, the wind blows the bamboo. Fine ink monochrome painting, 13th century in date. Next, here's another one. I have the whole plus, in this case, a detail. Yes, I don't remember, hold on. I don't remember where this is. One of the Yamamotos, is it? At any rate, here are these, it's again a swallow, but the mother bird, I suppose it is, or the older bird, anyway, is swooping down below, gathering insects, and then up above, as you can see in the detail, are the little birds in the nest with their beaks open. We saw a painting of little sparrows at the end of my lecture, first lecture on bird and flower painting, attributed to a late some Academy artist, very different, but also birds, little birds in the nest waiting for their mother. And here, drawn much more simply, in this hanging on this wind-blown branch of willow, are the three little birds with their beaks open, waiting for mother to come back and feed them. Quite fine. This is a quite simple and wonderful painting of a dove on a bamboo branch, I guess it is, yes, or possibly willow. It's hard to say. It doesn't seem to have to be divided into sections like bamboo is. Anyway, a dove, quiet, the whole painting is quiet. On our, this is in our Zenga, our Sōgenga exhibition again. It was a painting that certainly invites contemplation. And if it's Zen contemplation, okay. If it's just quiet contemplation, okay. But at any rate, it draws you out of your humdrum life into something else. And it was used that way by the Japanese, and it was used in a Zen context. So in that sense, and we're getting back to this big question of what is Zen painting, why is it Zen, how can it be Zen, etc. In that sense, it's a real Zen painting. Again, done in strokes of ink. If it's bamboo, it's very different bamboo from the kinds that you see in ink bamboo paintings done by literati and others in the more traditional kinds of Chinese painting. All right. Anyway, fine work. Here is a painting of a little sparrow, I think it is, on bamboo. Very similar. Ink on paper in this case. I don't know the collection. I pulled a bunch of these out of the drawer, and some of them are not even labeled. Okay. This is now we go on to see a few paintings of Gibbons. Gibbon paintings are often associated with Muqi. We saw the great Mother Gibbon and Child and the Daitokuji triptych. I spent a long time with that. But there are quite a few others floating around in Japan or out of Japan now, some of them. At any rate, this is a Gibbon and Child. It was in a private collection in Tokyo, the Nakamura collection. I think I photographed it there. The mother reaching up. Gibbons are often shown reaching as though they are kind of acquisitive. They, in a sense, are kind of parodies of certain human vices, acquisitiveness, whatever. But they're much more, what shall I say, profound and sympathetically portrayed than that. They're not parodies of anything really. But anyway, here's the mother Gibbon clutching the child, who was seen very, very simply, a little white creature, reaching upward as though reaching for something. And here's the detail of it. With a tree, it's related to the Muqi Gibbons, obviously, not of quite the same stature, but important in its way. Here, next please. Now here's a gibbon simply seated on a on a mound of earth, rather like the one by Yujian in a painting we'll see of Mount Lu later in this toward the end of this lecture. At any rate, this is maybe a 13th century painting. A little bit of tree branches or leaves up in the upper right, and the gibbon simply looking out at us. One arm raised, the other down. This one I bought actually in it was a little shop along the Madison Avenue, New York, for not very much. And it's now in the Berkeley Art Museum, owned by my daughter Sarah. We always gave monkey and gibbon paintings to her because she was so fond of monkeys. And we'd watch them in the zoo and so on. Anyway, this one, which is a sort of small scale, I mean, if you can't have a great Muqi painting, this is all right, good, worth having in itself. Quite fine painting of the gibbon's paw in the upper right. And again, it looks out at us like the one in the mother and child painting in the Daitokuchi, although it's not, I don't pretend it's on that level. Okay, here's a copy of it on paper. Somebody, but it's not so profound. The gibbon smiles a little bit, and generally it's more, you can almost say aggressive. Here's a detail. The gibbon here seemed to have an expression on its face which loses the whole point, and as I say, drawn more rather aggressively. Finally, for this part of the lecture, let me put on a painting by an artist named Wan Ruguan. Ruguan is the name by which she is best known. Wan, or Zuan, was a monk's name, and he was a 13th century monk. His best known painting, which I'm not showing, I don't have a good size of it, is in Seren's book and others, dated 1291. So he was a late 13th century painter, and he painted grapes. And grapes are not properly a Chan subject, although in a kind of loose way they were associated with the historical Buddha, because he was a Westerner and grapes came from the far west. But anyway, Ruguan, you can see his name here in the inscription on the right. This is, I think, a quite genuine Ruguan, which I acquired through a very complicated trade and whatever from the dealer Yamamoto in Tokyo. I admired it for years and finally acquired it after trying to get other people to buy it. Okay, horizontal painting. Here, next please. Here is the part of it up close. He probably, as I say, painted numbers of paintings of this kind, but it's quite wonderful in its way. Notice the way the leaf at the right is shown turning as blown by the wind. Imagine painting a leaf like that, somehow turning so you see the upper side and the underside down below. Imagine painting the vine so that it has the right tensile strength and yet flexibility, so the wind will bend it, but only to some degree. And the painting of the grapes themselves, you drop bits of ink into each of the little rounded wet areas so that it spreads while it's still wet. And this very fine technique of showing a leaf in relief, in reserve, I mean, that's the proper term. Reserve, by leaving it in white against the dark, the one in the upper part of the group here. And the shading on the leaf over here at the far left. There's a lot of really wonderful late Song mastery of ink monochrome painting in a painting like this, which you may not see at first. I really use this painting a lot to show my students and talk about it at length, and got them just look to see just what the artist has done here. Here another detail. Here's a section of it with another, the branch and the tendrils and the leaves turning in different ways. There's a painting like this, but just vastly not so sensitive, a Shenzhou, which I used to put beside it, which is much more orthodox, proper Chinese, and would be vastly more desirable for a Chinese collector. But at any rate, in my reminiscence number 35 on my website, you'll find how I actually was able to acquire this painting, and now it's in the Berkeley Art Museum, along with another painting I acquired the same way, representing, as I say, the late Song mastery of ink monochrome at its absolutely finest, Gurguan. All right, this is the part of this last lecture, which will be on surviving paintings from two sets of the 8 views of the Xiao-Xiang region, one attributed to Muqi, the other by an artist named Yujian. I'll talk about them as we go. And putting on the screen now to begin with is one of the Muqi series, the one titled Evening Glow on a Fishing Village. And it's in the Nezu Museum in Tokyo. These are both hand scroll compositions. Originally, they were parts, that is, of a long hand scroll made up of 8 parts, representing the 8 views of the Xiao-Xiang. I'll speak again about those in a moment. Now they have been all mounted as hanging scrolls, and the Japanese, as I've said, are not really comfortable with the hand scroll form except as narrative, where they're great emaki, where you can roll the painting and read the story. But for paintings for contemplation, they want them as hanging scrolls they can hang in their tokonoma and gaze at for a long time, not have to keep rolling, so to speak. This one, anyway, is in the Nezu Museum, and it's the one that I know best and that I knew very well when I was a student in Japan. Mr. Nezu, then the director of the museum, was very kind to me and showed me paintings, and we talked and got to know each other. And I was able to reproduce a section of this from the last part. I'll show you later, as in my Skira book. Before that, I had reproduced a section of it in the old Crown Publisher book, the Chinese Paintings 11th to 14th Centuries. So I knew this one best of all. And I want to talk about it as a painting and then make some general observations. It begins here, next please, with a section showing houses among trees and a boat on the water. And then bands of mist, diagonal, cutting through the trees. Quite wonderful. And the fishermen in the boat one of them is pulling in the net. It's evening. The sky is darkened a bit. Next, please. Here is a detail showing what the section closer up. On the earth slope, the putting on the ink has been done with a brush that has stiff bristles or fibers. It may have been a brush of split bamboo. It may have been straw. Various brushes were used so that the stroke would split and leave streaks of light within the stroke. And this could be read as highlights and shadows on a form. And it's used that way here. Then the trees are indicated only by very simple trunk and branch forms, and then the foliage by even simpler splashes of ink, and houses only by roofs. So this is a good example of the splashed ink style to begin with. Here, closer up in a detail. This is actually a proper slide made from the original, and you can see better the effects of the split brush used on the earth slope. Okay, then the second section. Here it is. This is a section that I had in my Skira book, and I put it beside a section a small painting by Mio Run in the Abe collection, and discussed the relationship between Chan Buddhist painting and literati painting. But I'm not doing that here. I've done it separately and elsewhere. So what this represents, as you see, are more fishermen in boats, houses across the on the further shore, seen only as low roofs, and then in the lower left, a more houses under trees closer up, and earth masses. This is the foreground section, so to speak. The next, please. Yes, here. This is still closer up. Okay, here you can see even better the use of this rough bristled brush to make strokes with streaks of light inside, used also on the mountains up above. And it gives a convincing effect of light and shadow, and can be read by the viewer as surface of as earth surface and mountain surface and so on, or as tree foliage, whatever the artist decides you are to see. I put beside it now here. This should be very familiar to you. This is, of course, a section of the great Pure and Remote Scroll by Xiao-Gui. And I showed it at great length in my first lecture and again in the lecture on Xiao-Gui, so you know it. But I put it on just to point out that behind the earth masses as rendered by Muqi, if it is Muqi, lies something like this. That is, after Xiao-Gui and others had developed the technique of shaping earth masses by heavy light and shadow, light sides and dark sides, and rendering the tree foliage in masses instead of individual trees and so forth. All of this, the achievements of painters like Xiao-Gui lie behind what the Chan painters of the Wei Sung have done. Now, let me talk a bit about the subject and the style while we have these on the screen. The Xiao-Xiang region is in present Hunan province and is famous for its misty lake scenery and wonderfully lush scenery generally. It had been the subject of poetry from very early times. The pre-Han poet Chu Yuan had lived there and died there. He drowned himself. So it was famous for that. And it was associated with other poets and others down over the centuries. And in the 11th century, a writer named Sung Di, contemporary of Su Dong Po and Huang Tingzhen and the rest of them, had composed a set of poems, the 8 Views of the Xiao-Xiang, and that's what underlies these paintings. The earliest surviving version of them is probably a hand scroll, which may be by an artist named Wang Hong in the Princeton Art Museum. There's a study of this, very good, better than the painting deserves in some ways, is by Alfreda Merck, first in her dissertation and then in her book, Poetry and Painting in Sung China, The Subtle Art of Descent, which I've talked about before. And I strongly urge you to read what she has to write about the subject and about these paintings, and about the Wang Hong painting, which I'm not showing, but it may be the earliest surviving version. Also, the book by Brinker and Kanazawa, The Zen Masters of Meditation, reproduces a series of this 8 views done by Japanese artists, particularly a very fine series by the artist Toho Shun, the disciple of Sesshu, drawing loosely on the Yujian series, superb paintings. Okay, going back then to Muqi's version, and while it is on the screen, let me talk a bit about the splash ink style. The capacity of the eye and the mind to read imagery into the formless or amorphous shapes was known from quite early times in China, and we have artists who were famous as ink splashers, another kind of pause for splash, hatsuboku in Japanese. Writers of the time would advise the painter to look at a mud wall and make use of the chance configurations he saw there, or hang a fine gauze over the old wall and see through that and maybe sketch on it. Guaxi reportedly told the plasterers who were doing a wall he was going to paint on, told them to leave the wall rough, not smooth it, so that he could use the chance shapes, configurations in composing his painting on the wall. This was a way of avoiding the man-made. I've talked about that before. Anyway, there must have been lots of paintings of that kind over the ages, but none have been preserved. But they must underlie late Song Dynasty splashed ink landscape of the kind that we see here, in which the identifying signs are reduced still further, and ambiguous ink splashes are made to perform the larger function of evoking the scene and evoking space. So, as you see in this comparison, Chan painting has a lot in common with other southern Song painting, particularly Xiaogui. One might ask, is this because Xiaogui was affected by Chan Buddhism? Well, he might have been. We don't know. But that is a false, I think, a false mode of explanation. I've tried to argue as we went along that neither Chan nor any other system of thought or religion produces a style. Artists produce styles. Large collective movements are products of collective effort. The creation of individual features of style is the achievement of individual artists often. But it's an infrequent phenomenon, scattered occurrences. That is to say, most artists just follow what they learn and don't do any big innovations. Well, we normally can't isolate these innovations easily or tell exactly who was responsible for them, much less attribute them to specific causes. So what we should try to do, I think, is analyze not the causes behind the creation of styles, but reasons or factors behind stylistic choice. What was there in this style that made it seem appropriate, effective for expressing the ideas, the version of the world that the Chan artists wanted and the users of the paintings wanted? The Chan artists were no doubt as familiar with Maoyuan as they were with Xiaogui, but they chose elements of Xiaogui's style to use, and they found Maoyuan's style unusable. And we can analyze why or suggest reasons behind this choice, and that, as I say, is the kind of argument that I am likely to make. Okay, going on. Here is the distant mountain top, and you can see again the use of broad strokes with a stiff bristle brush to lay out washes that have streaks in them, and a few dots or dian up at the top to pin, sort of speaks, pin this down. Okay, then the next, this is the one titled "Boats Returning from a Distant Inlet," again, I start out by showing the entire composition, but one has to imagine it again, seen as though from right to left. And with this one, as you roll from the right, here, let's have the next slide, please. You see very little indeed, a very minimal indication of a shore in the lower left. Two boats driven by the wind. The wind itself suggested by strokes of highly dilute ink moving diagonally and indicating the direction of the boats. And then just a bit of distant shore in the upper left. Then as you move on and see the next section, here is the second part of it. And you see the scenery itself as blown by the wind, the trees on the shore. And here is a inn or wine shop, or stopping place anyway, with the usual flag flying. And two figures in front of it. One of them has laid down his load, which he has been carrying. This is a traveler who's just arrived at the inn and is talking with someone, the innkeeper maybe, we don't know what's happening. And down below to their right, two figures seated on the shore. Seated, and one of them with his arm out as if pointing, that familiar thing we've seen in various landscape paintings. And then this quite wonderfully painted windy trees, split brush again, brush strokes divided, and then set in a very inchoate, misty, hard to make out area of bushes and so forth. These, I say, may have been done by Muqi, we don't know that. But at any rate, they're masterworks of this manner, the splashed ink manner, and the best we have. Notice how in the distant shoreline is also done with a split brush technique, which avoids the sort of clearly indicated single-stroke shoreline, maybe muddy shoals offshore, whatever, making it more readable as going out into the surface of the water, and then misty trees and a few dots on the hills up above. The next place, this one is titled "The Evening Bell from a Temple in Mist," and it's reproduced in Max Lohr and Seren and so on. But again, unhappily, I have only slides made from reproductions. I don't have any from the original. Okay, and if you imagine it again as read from right to left as you unroll, which I think we should do, you begin by seeing very little indeed, and then come just to left of center, come to the climax, so to speak, a very quiet climax indeed, where you see temple roofs among the trees, and then it fades out again. Well, I wish I had a better slide of this to make the point, but I used to use this to suggest that somehow the artist, all but miraculously, has somehow suggested the idea of a bell, the sound of the bell reverberating outward, as though you have the basic sound itself in this darkest area, and then echoes of it moving outward in the temple roofs and trees and anyway, smaller indications, as if reverberations moving outward from the central sound of the bell. Okay, the next, please. Here is a detail of the main section, and you see bare trees rising above the general wash area of the land, and a few roofs, temple roofs, and maybe secular building roofs to the right, and tree groups done in this manner. Washes of ink throughout go horizontally to indicate the further areas and again sort of misty shores. And here it's still closer up. This is a vertical detail showing this. The temple roof, the clearest, most clearly drawn element of the whole picture, in the upper left here, temple roofs drawn in light line, and then down below roofs of another temple building, and as I say, as you move out, less and less clear and distinct things, and quite washes of ink in the upper part, indicating an evening setting. It is an evening scene, and the sound of the bell reaching you from a distance. Okay, the next, please. This is the one in the series titled "Geese Alighting on a Flat Shoal," and it's also in the Idemitsu Museum now, a private museum in Tokyo. This painting arouses various memories in me. When I was a student in Japan in the 1950s, Junkichi Mayuyama, the dealer, who I was very close to, we were good friends, and I used to live near him and use his store for all kinds of purposes. Anyway, he arranged for me to visit the owner of this painting. He had sold it, and he went with me to this owner, and it was a big event. To see this painting was really a great privilege, and he had done this for me as a student. And so we arrived at this man's house in the evening, and after drinking tea and talking, I was taken to the place where the painting was hanging in the tokonoma, and I knelt in front of it, and the lighting was not good, but enough so I could see, and there I knelt and gazed, and knelt and gazed, and I saw pretty much all there was I could see in a very short time, but to get up and go away after being given this great privilege would have been unthinkable. So there I was, kneeling uncomfortably and gazing and wishing the artist had given me more to see. Okay, anyway, that's one memory. Later, the painting was bought by the Idemitsu Museum, it was bought for the highest price that had ever been paid for a painting up to that time, about $1 million, which doesn't seem like a lot now, but it certainly was then. No painting had sold for anything like that up to that time. And I put the slide of it before my students in class. I was teaching at Berkeley by that time, and talked about the painting in those terms. I mean, in a positive way first, but then I was saying that the great value of it for the Japanese was partly the mystique, sheer space as mystique. And it was really the space. It was almost as though they had paid this big price for blank paper. And I was saying that if there had been another hill, the price would have dropped $100,000 maybe, and if there had been a tree, another 100,000, and so on. So anyway, that was a bit disrespectful, but it was making a point at any rate. And this is true of Japanese appreciation of this kind of painting. And indeed, it was mystique and space that they were largely paying for. I used to buy postcards of this painting at the Idemitsu Museum so that I could doctor them, as seen here, and use them for sending small messages to friends in the field who would appreciate my little joke. In my markings, the markings I add to the postcard, one of the geese in the painting says, "Honk," and another one responds, "Quiet, this is a Zen painting." As I say, I had a special grudge against this painting from the time when, long ago, I had to kneel in front of it for a long time, Japanese style, sitting on my feet, which was never very comfortable for me, gazing at it hanging in the tokonoma alcove. In addition to the 4 surviving paintings from the 8 views of the Xiao-Xiang attributed to Muqi, a 5th painting in the series survived up to modern times, but was destroyed in 1945, presumably in some bombing of a Japanese city. I don't know the details. It's listed in my index as former Tokugawa and Suenobu collections, and reference are given there to books where it's reproduced. This image is taken from one of them. It represents evening snow on the hills and is similar in composition to the Nezu Museum's sunset over a fishing village that we began with, opening with a quiet view of distant mountains, continuing with a heavier middle ground view of the far shore, with what appears to be buildings among trees and snow-covered hills above, and a round full moon seen over one of them. And then it draws our gaze into the foreground with more buildings among trees. I can't see the details clearly in the image I have. Seriously interested scholars can find original photographs in Japanese archives, and I put this on simply to call it to your attention. Now, the other artist to whom paintings of this type, this series, is attributed is Yujian. Now, in the case of Yujian, the paintings are very probably by Yujian. We have another painting by him signed, and the calligraphy is the same, and they're generally accepted. The problem is that we don't really know who Yujian was. There are 2 artists who use this name, and one of them, named Rofun Yujian, was actually not a Chan Zen monk, but a Tentai, monk of the Tentai sect. And Suzuki K. Suzuki, wrote an article long ago. I don't know whether it's been supplanted by something more recent, but I'm not aware of it if there is, about the identity of Yujian, which is still somewhat uncertain. Suzuki chose this Rofun Yujian as the probable artist of the paintings, but there was also a Ying Yujian, a monk painter who lived in a temple near Hangzhou. And as far as location goes, it seems more likely these would be done in the area of Hangzhou, where Muqi was, and Liang Kai and others, and other Chan monk painters, than wherever the other Yujian was. Well, I can't add it in any way to that, but I simply have to leave it open. So here is the first of 3 paintings that survive from Yujian series. This is the one titled Returning Sails from a Distant Inlet. The poem is written by Yujian at the left. They have quatrains on these paintings. The poems are translated by Alfreda Merck in her book, pages 255 to 59, or 57 rather, and she discusses these paintings. So you should read what she has to say about them too, in addition to what I say. Here we see 2 people in a boat facing each other and talking, a very common theme in 13th century or even earlier painting. We saw something like it in Shaogui. And then on the shore, houses or a few buildings among the trees. not very much, not much seen. And what seems to be it looks like a pagoda roof. It's not quite clear in the upper right there, and a bridge in lower right, and very simple indications of earth and trees and the rest. Okay, the next one in the series is titled, just a minute here, is titled Autumn Moon over Lake Dongting. Lake Dongting was in the Xiao-Xiang region. Lake Dongting is still very much there. One can go there. And this is the painting of the autumn moon. The moon itself is seen up here in the just a bit to the left of center in the sky, simply drawn. And then the poem over at the left, and the something out in the lake, and then houses among trees, or a building among trees in the right here. Here is a detail of it. While that's on, let me say that there's an article by a writer I don't know, Yi Lo Fun by name, published in the Journal of Art History, published by Taiwan National University, in the March 2008 version, about the seals that are found on Yujian's paintings, and the possibility that they were owned before going to Japan by a scholar artist of the Yuan dynasty named Guo Tianxi. Now this is very interesting. Guo Bi also himself had painted a picture that has seals on it of two monks from the 1330s of the Yuan dynasty, that is. This is in the period after this, but it affects what I've been saying. Now, I've been saying that Muqi's paintings and Yujian's paintings, and paintings of this kind generally, were rejected by the Chinese literati of the Yuan and later, and that's generally true, but there must have been exceptions, of course, as there are to any general statement. So we have to allow for the possibility that some interchange between literati and Chan artists continuing on in the later centuries, Yuan and later. I have an article which I've spoken about before about continuations of Chan painting into Ming and Qing, and Helmut Brinker has done several articles on relations between Yuan period literati and Chan monks, particularly in portrait painting, and these you'll find in his book and in bibliographies. So when I say the Chinese literati rejected this kind of painting, I'm saying something that is generally true, but I'm talking only of a large general response, especially in the later centuries, and of course there were exceptions. Okay, here you see the detail from that painting, and what it shows us is you see the underside of a bridge, and then beside it what seems to be just a little bit of the upper edge of the bridge, sort of crenellated. And then above that, the upper story of a building, dimly seen through the mist, an open porch and a railing, and trees around it, done in this free manner. Okay, then here is the third of the paintings by Yujian. This is also in the Idemitsu Art Museum, and it's the one titled Mountain Village in Mist. Now this is for me the grand masterwork of the whole school, or the whole type. Just before I go on, yes, okay, this is the whole picture with the poem at the left. And what you see is what it's about. The subject matter is a mountain village, that is houses built on the slope of a mountain. And over in the far right, as you roll it from right, you see somebody arriving with a pole over his shoulder carrying his luggage. And then you see houses among the trees. Down below, two earth masses drawn in very dark ink, connected by a bridge, some kind of plank bridge made of two different planks. And then up above them, you see two figures looking like old people, sort of hunched over, making their way up, suggesting that there are steps going up toward the houses on the hillside, and then trees around the houses, and then further slopes, as though, in other words, you have a road that goes past these houses and moves up and goes around the mountain ridge in the middle, upper middle here, and continues. So it's one of our stopping places we've seen so many times for travelers. All right. Now, while I have this on, let me put on a detail of it before I talk more about it. In my 1960 book, Chinese Paintings to 11th to 14th Centuries, I wrote about it, probably better than I could say now, about this kind of painting. Some affinities between the methods of achieving Chan spiritual and artistic ends should certainly be noted. Suddenness and spontaneity rule in both cases. If an intuitive awareness is to be communicated at all, it must be by a direct and immediate revelation of its very essence. It cannot be done by translating it into rational terms and expecting the recipient to translate it back into something like the original impulse. Hence, Chan Buddhism refuses to present the student with a well-lit road to enlightenment, and Chan painting declines in a like way to present a ready-made, clearly delineated image. It defines the subject at a few key points: face and hands in the case of a portrait, buildings and a path perhaps in a landscape, figures, buildings, and perhaps a path in the landscape, and leaves the remainder ambiguous, sometimes amorphous, suggestive rather than descriptive. The observer is left to transform these rough-drawn lines and inchoate areas into a solid body or into trees, rocks, a mist-hung void. And then I go on to point out this is essentially a different approach from that of the typical academy artist, who, for all his economy and selectivity, presents in as lucid a way as he can whatever he chooses to present at all. And that Chan painting has none of the courtly air of the academy. Objects are not beautified or sentimentalized. It is ordinary, everyday sensory experience, which in Chan has as much value as any other, that furnishes the material for the pictures. Even modest materials, ink and paper, much of the time, are used, and these go with the simple, somewhat ascetic life of Chan monks. Okay, so much for that. Now this is, for me, as I say, the grand masterwork of this kind of painting. I remember sitting, not kneeling in this case, or standing in front of it in the Idemitsu Museum for a long period, gazing at it. What the artist has done is near miraculous for me, because it evokes so powerfully, so magically, a scene with so much in it, so much going on, so much understood. Okay, in the foreground, as I say, two large earth masses done with, again, brushes that somehow split so as to leave streaks that read as highlights or areas of light on a dark mass connected by the bridge. So we have a foreground defined. Then middle ground is the big area of fog in which we see only these two old people climbing, one of them using a cane, climbing up toward the houses, indicating that there is a path and maybe steps there. And then the roofs of the houses among the trees, only the roofs shown, and then these wonderful splashes of ink that render in a mysterious way the trees, the hillsides, all the rest of the painting anyway. The next piece, here it is up still closer. This is, I have one here from a photograph. This shows you more closely just the real character of these extraordinary strokes of ink. All right, so much for that one. That, as I say, is just about, for me, the high point of all this, of this kind of painting. Now, also by Yujian, and probably reliably by him, is the painting, two paintings actually, but originally one painting, of a waterfall on Mount Lu. Here is the main section of that. Again, an inscription by Yujian himself, in this case signed. You see what his signature is here. And then the peaks looming above the fog, done in the same way with brushes that have left streaks of light on them so as to give texture and light and shadow and shape to these looming peaks. Here is a slide, just a minute, yes. Here's a slide I took at the top of Mount Lu. Now, it doesn't look like Yujian's paintings. The peaks are not rounded. But it's enough to show that there is something behind this. That is to say, peaks looming up out of the mist, seen from a distance. So this is the kind of experience that must underlie Yujian's painting. Whether Yujian went there is another matter. Probably he may have gotten something from other paintings. So at any rate, now in Japan, there's a copy of the original form of this waterfall on Mount Lu, and here it is. This is a Japanese copy from a slightly later date. And as you see, the right 2/3 of it corresponds closely to the existing painting. But then on to the left of that, we have a waterfall. So what has happened to that? Okay, next. Here it is. The waterfall was cut off to be mounted separately from the main part of the painting. This is one of the negative aspects of Japanese appreciation of Chinese paintings, that they were given to separate the paintings to make more simple images they could gaze at and have them go do their Zen meditation. Well, that's unfortunate. I can't imagine the two would ever be reunited. They're in different collections now. But at least we can put them together and understand what the painting was like originally. It was not quite so simple as the present looming peaks would indicate. The waterfall must have given it more of something lively, a little bit more of interest. And up above the waterfall, what seems to be intended as tree foliage. Okay, now we go on. Here's a painting which originally was attributed to Yujian, published in an old issue of Kokka magazine, and I copied it and used it in class and elsewhere for a long time as another work either by Yujian or by some late Song artist of this type. That is a quite fine, small work in the splashed ink landscape manner. In this case, what is represented, as you see, what you see is a slope of earth by the riverside and houses seen partly cut off by the slope, and then trees jutting out into the space from the slope, and then a fisherman, fisherman probably in a boat down below. Quite a remarkable and fine little picture of that type. Well, what is interesting is that in a recent exhibition of the Japanese painter Sesshu, the great Muromachi painter of Japan, this same painting was reproduced and reattributed as an early work of Sesshu. Now, I don't know what the basis for that is, or if there is any basis, or if they've just decided to make it Japanese rather than Chinese. In any case, until I see some good reason for it, I'm going to continue to think of it as a late Song painting associated with Yujian. This ends my long treatment of Song landscape, properly speaking, and for the purpose of this lecture, we've also ended our consideration of painting of the Southern Song period generally, since the Song ends with the invasion of all of China by the Mongols in the late 13th century. The usual date given for the end of Song is 1279. And a new dynasty, founded by the Mongols and named the Yuan, begins. But we will have a postlude, the first of 3 or 4, in which I'll talk about what comes after the Mongol invasion and the end of the Song dynasty, and I'll introduce an argument about how we are to construct this transition, which has usually been treated as an artistic revolution, in which I would like to continue seeing that way. So, please watch the postlude if you want to really see the exciting ending of this first series of lectures. The end of the Song, that is, won't make me stop talking.